Economy News Pressed. Economic Collapse Documentary. There is no precise definition of an economic collapse. The term has been used to describe a broad range of bad economic conditions, ranging from a severe, prolonged depression with high bankruptcy rates and high unemployment, such as the Great Depression of the 1930s, to a breakdown in normal commerce caused by hyperinflation, such as in Weimar Germany in the 1920s, or even an economically caused sharp rise in the death rate and perhaps even a decline in population, such as in countries of the former USSR in the 1990s. Historical examples: China 1852-70 edit. The Taiping Rebellion, followed by internal warfare, famines, and epidemics, caused the deaths of over 100 million and greatly reduced the economy. Weimar Germany edit. Following Germany's defeat in World War I, political instability resulted in murders and assassinations of hundreds of political figures. C. German Revolution of 1918–1919 and Kapp Putsch. Germany's finances were heavily strained by the war and reparations in accordance with the Treaty of Versailles. Unable to raise enough in taxes to run the government and make war reparations, the government resorted to printing money, which resulted in great hyperinflation. One book on the hyperinflation, which includes quotes and a few first-hand accounts, is When Money Dies. The hyperinflation eventually ended. It cleared government debt at the cost of the citizens' savings. Some believe that the hyperinflation of 1923 has helped fuel the eventual rise of the Nazi Party and the rise of Hitler to power in 1933. 9 economists, however, tend to attribute Hitler's rise to the deflation and the Great Depression beginning in 1929. 10-11 Paul Krugman concluded that the 1923 hyperinflation didn't bring Hitler to power. It was the Bruning deflation and depression. Before 1929 the Nazi Party was actually in decline, with less than 3% of votes in the German federal election of 1928. The Great Depression of the 1930s. While arguably not a true economic collapse, the decade of the 1930s witnessed the most severe worldwide economic contraction since the start of the Industrial Revolution. In the U.S., the Depression began in the summer of 1929, soon followed by the stock market crash of October 1929. American stock prices continued to decline in fits and starts until they hit bottom in July 1932. In the first quarter of 1933, the banking system broke down, asset prices had collapsed, bank lending had largely ceased, a quarter of the American workforce was unemployed, and real GDP per capita in 1933 was 29% below its 1929 value. The ensuing rapid recovery was interrupted by a major recession in 1937–38. The USA fully recovered by 1941, the eve of its entry in World War II, which gave rise to a boom as dramatic as the depression that preceded it. While there were numerous bank failures during the Great Depression, most banks in developed countries survived, as did most currencies and governments. The most significant monetary change during the Depression was the demise of the gold standard by most nations that were on it. In the U.S., the dollar was redeemable in gold until 1933, when U.S. citizens were forced to turn over their gold, except for 5 ounces, for fiat currency, see Executive Order 6102, and were forbidden to own monetary gold for the next 4 decades. Subsequently, gold was revalued from $20.67 per ounce to $35 per ounce. U.S. dollars remained redeemable in gold by foreigners until 1971. Gold ownership was legalized in the U.S. in 1974, but not with legal tender status. As bad as the Great Depression was, it took place during a period of high productivity growth, which caused real wages to rise. The high unemployment was partly a result of the productivity gains, allowing the number of hours of the standard work week to be cut while restoring economic output to previous levels after a few years. Workers who remained employed saw their real hourly earnings rise because wages remained constant while prices fell. However, overall earnings remained relatively constant because of the reduced work week. 14 Converting the dollar to a fiat currency and devaluing against gold ensured the end of deflation and created inflation, which made the high debt accumulated during the 1920s boom easier to repay, although some of the debt was written off. Economic collapse of Soviet communism. During the 1980s, the Eastern Bloc, which relied on a stagnant form of planned economy, experienced a decade-long period of stagflation, an eventual collapse from which it did not recover, culminating with revolutions and the fall of communist regimes throughout Central and Eastern Europe and eventually in the Soviet Union. The process was accompanied by a gradual but important easing of restrictions on economic and political behavior in the late 1980s, including the satellite states. The collapse in the USSR was characterized by an increase in the death rate, especially by men over 50, with alcoholism a major cause. There was also an increase in violent crime and murder. The Russian population peaked in the 1990s and is lower today than 2 decades ago, as the demographics of Russia show. A first-hand account of conditions during the economic collapse was told by Dmitry Orlov, a former USSR citizen who became a US citizen but returned to Russia for a time during the crisis. Russian financial crisis of 1998. After more or less stabilizing after the disintegration of the USSR, a severe financial crisis took place in the Russian Federation in August 1998. It was caused by low oil prices and government expenditure cuts after the end of the Cold War. Other nations of the former Soviet Union also experienced economic collapse, although a number of crises also involved armed conflicts, like in the breakaway region Chechnya. The default by Russia on its government bonds in 1998 led to the collapse of highly leveraged hedge fund long-term capital management, which threatened the world financial system. The U.S. Federal Reserve organized a bailout of LTCM which turned it over to a banking consortium. Alternative theories of economic collapse. Some economists, i.e. the Austrian school, in particular Ludwig von Mises, believe that government intervention and over-regulation of the economy can lead to the conditions for collapse. In particular, Austrian theoretical research has been focused on such problems emanating from socialist forms of economic organization. This, however, is not a theory of economic collapse involving the breakdown of freely functioning financial markets. Rather, the focus is on economic malfunction and crisis emanating from state control. Georgist explanation. In The Science of Political Economy, published in 1905, Henry George argued that because land is a scarce resource, it is particularly subject to speculation, and many financial crises in the USA in the 19th century were caused by bank lending practices linked to asset bubbles in the market for land. George suggested that speculative bubbles burst when the banks run out of money and can no longer lend for such speculative investments. Bank insolvencies would follow as the asset price drops and speculators are unable to repay loans. This is not a theory of economic collapse proper but a hypothesis of shortcomings in bank lending as a cause of financial crisis and economic collapse. The Economy News Pressed. Please subscribe to our channel.